Hi, my name's Shirley Basket. I was born in New Zealand. But I live in Australia now. But I was born into a family where there were 3 children. I was the youngest, but the oldest was my brother, and he was autistic, but they didn't have a name for it back then, so my mother didn't know what to do. She was having to look after him day and night. So by the time I was born, she didn't really have time to nurture me or cuddle me or anything like that as a child. So my first beginning in life was that I didn't really bond to my mother. But as I grew up in this family, by the time my brother was 12 years of age, he ran away from home and he was gone for a week, and they found him drowned in one of the harbours in Auckland. And so my mother began to grieve, and she was always crying, and always my home was so dark. And so for me, I began to think, if that's what it is to be female, I don't want to be female. I didn't think those thoughts totally, but they were the things starting to set in my life. My father was a very gentle man, a very philosophical man, but he was remote, and in his grief, he just went away, and his mind went to business, and he had no contact with me really. He was a good man. One time when I was around about 10 years of age, he patted me on the head and he said, "Shirley, you think too much." And I cherished that moment because my father spoke to me. He could never remember my name. My sister's name was Evelyn, and so he used to call me Chevelyn. So that didn't give me a great deal of thought about how I was being nurtured in my family. My mother also used to say to me things like, "You'd be better off having been born a boy. This is a man's world." And I used to think, I wish I had been born a boy, because if I had, I would have had the love perhaps that I needed, and maybe I could have replaced my brother. But so I just thought all of these things, and as I grew up, I wished I'd been born a boy. However, I grew up in a Christian family, and so I went to a Bible college when I was around about the age of 19. I'm a bit older, of course, and so around that time, they'd had the 1960s sexual revolution. And so in my teens, I'd gone out with boys, never worked for me. I would have all sorts of crazy things happen. And so I didn't think that I would ever find love with a man. But at the same time, I wanted to go on as a Christian, and I really hoped maybe one day I could marry and lead a good life. However, when I was in Bible college, I met a woman and I fell very, very deeply, obsessively into this feeling of love for her. On my graduation night from Bible college, I entered my first lesbian relationship. And so that was very conflicting for me as a Christian, because I didn't believe that that was the right thing to do. However, because it was so obsessive, I just didn't think that I could change that. In fact, I began to believe that I must have been born that way. And I wondered if maybe God had even made a mistake and put a man into a very short, womanly body. And so I just didn't think that I could change. However, I decided I'd walk away from God, walk away from my church, and I made this woman my God, and she was everything to me. However, after a very short time, she ran away with another woman. Okay, so my whole life fell apart. I was crushed, didn't know what to do. I didn't think I could change, so I thought the only way I was going to find life was to find another woman, find somebody who could fulfill me. So I spent 8.5 years trying to do that, and I had many relationships. Some were short relationships, some were long relationships. But after that 8.5 years, I began to look at what life was going to be for me as I got older. And the gay world is a very young world most of the time, and I was seeing my older friends either maybe settling for a relationship that to me didn't look perfect, or perhaps some of them were doing like I was doing, drinking yourself to death. And so I just thought, what is my future going to be like? I don't want to go into my future alone. Maybe the best thing that I could do would be to just do away with it, kill myself. And so I thought maybe I could go to the Auckland Harbour Bridge and jump off and commit suicide, because I didn't think I could change and I didn't think my life could be any better. But not everybody who jumps off that harbour bridge dies. Some people just break every bone in their body, and I'm not into pain. I don't like pain, and so I was thinking about what could I do. But I was also thinking, I wonder if God is out there. I wonder if I could get back to him, if he exists. So I prayed a last prayer and said, if you are out there, can you please show me? Because if you are, and if you'll have me back, I don't care about trying to find love with anybody, a man or a woman. I'm over that. And so if I can find you again, I will come back to you, and that will be it. That night, a man came round to my place where I was living. I was living on my own by then. I had 4 cats. My cats were faithful, okay? And so I just had these animals in my house and me, and nobody really knew where I was living at that time. I had just moved there. But someone knocked on my door, a man I'd known when I was a younger Christian, and he said, I've come round to talk with you. And so there was a longer story behind all of that, but I had my answer that God was reaching out to me, and if he was, then I was going to never go back. So that weekend, the pub that I used to go to drink was a gay pub, but it was closing that weekend. And so I went to the pub and I shouted drinks for all my friends, and I said, I'm leaving. They said, where are you going? Nobody just goes. I said, well, I am, and I'm going back to church. I said I couldn't quite even say God back then. And they said, well, nobody does that. And I said, well, I am, and that's what I'm going to do. But I loved my friends, and so I hoped that I would see them come maybe to know God as well. So from that night onwards, I came back to my Christian faith. And so at that point though, I needed so many other things to change in my life, because there were all these things that had made up the reason for why I'd had that yearning in the first place to try and find a woman. And so over a number of years, I came to understand those things. And also over a very short time, I began to think to myself, well, I can't change my orientation, so therefore I will just be a celibate lesbian woman and I will live my Christian life. However, God had a very different plan for me, and because I didn't come back to go straight, I came back because I missed God in my life. And so that's my story. I know it's not everybody's story, but that was my reason. Within about 6 months, I met a young man who had come to the church group I was in, and he had come from the punk scene, and so he was a drummer, and he was a lot younger than me. And I thought, look at that young man, I bet he thinks he's seen some life. You know, I couldn't even begin to tell him the things that I saw and did in Sydney when I lived there, or in the life that I'd lived running a women's club in Auckland. And I thought, look at him. But God had meant us to get together, and so I married him, and I've been married for over 35 years now. It's lasted that long so far, and he has put us together as a very special team of people, because I now run a ministry in Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific to help people who have these kinds of struggles. And I meet people everywhere who have come out of LGBT lives. I know people who are transgendered in our part of the world who have come and moved out of that. I've met people who are in churches who maybe had some experience and they walked away from that. There are many, many people who've come out of this life and found that freedom to live in a different way.